And likewise, I'm thankful for the committee that we're able to attend. I would expand on our President's view around beyond two. And if I look at the Uniting Church, it has been a long journey for the inclusion of LGBTIQ people. And if we look at, say, the decision for the Uniting Church to allow the option for ministers to marry people and for the option for a church property to be used for a same-gender marriage, that was a long journey of, I think, went over probably at least 2 or 3 assemblies. So we're talking about 6+ years just on the question of marriage. A week-long discussion at Assembly, and some of my friends said sometimes our assemblies make the New South Wales bear pit gentle. So there is a robustness to theology and discussion that happens within a strong and diverse community.
Thank you, Mr. Masters.
Ms. Hammond, may I make a comment with your previous question just about areas that got worse? From Uniting Network's point of view, whilst we're pleased to see the removal of the override, the Medical Board of Australia, those 4 boards, we think it's our view, and we are not lawyers, we're not legislative writers, so this is the naive inquirer. But from what we could see, it's actually created an unintended consequence that actually makes that risk, in fact, much broader outside of health to all sorts of other things. But I'd just like to, and I'm not picking on freedom of faith for any particular reason, but they've just got a statement in there that I think is useful to reflect on. So that's submission number 10 on their page 12 and 13. They talk about hateful speech by doctors and nurses, and they say that there's nobody would say anybody's been affected by the devil, or it's fanciful, I think is the language they've used. We've actually outlined in our 9 October 20, I think it is. 20 submission. There's so many submissions we've had to do around this. And we've actually got a number of case studies that are real case studies. So we try and separate things up between case studies and scenarios. So there's one case study where came to the New South Wales Medical Board where we understand a doctor was counselled because she made comments around a young gay patient who had mental health issues. We provided case study number 3, which is actually one of our executives, around how she was dealt with by a psychiatrist. She told me that gay was being wrong and God would disapprove of it in the counselling session, a psychiatrist. And I'm not going to read it all out, but on page 16 of that October submission, it's case study 4, and it actually goes on for about 6 pages where a doctor was discriminated for about was suspended for treatment of about 6 or 7 doctors, including a lesbian patient with ADHD. You have to pray, you're the same as pedophiles. Patient B who had alcohol issues, Jesus hates you, don't cry, Jesus drank, you should see a priest and the priest wants you to confess. Your former husband and her sluts of a mother. It goes on. Patient C, who's a Muslim patient, this doctor, as a Christian, put holy water and the sign of a cross on the forehead of patient C, prayed over them, knowing that this patient was a Muslim. Patient D, a woman, had a stillborn child induced at 22 weeks, was having suicidal thoughts. God can help you, God is love. She should ask God for forgiveness for her son's death. Female being diagnosed with depression and anxiety, you should join a church. Once you get to heaven, we can have a little dress upon a cloud. Bring Jesus into your life, so on and so forth. So that is all I've extracted out of a New South Wales NCAT case where a doctor was suspended. So these comments that these things don't happen is fanciful. And if I may take a slight tangent of your time, I'd like to refer back to...
Can I just ask what happened to that doctor?
Yeah.
Can you give
She
us...
was suspended.
Yes.
Was suspended for several years.
So the professional standards sorted that matter?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
I think the point that we will also clear up with the Attorney General's Department is that even if this bill is passed, the professional standard conduct rules would still see that person chucked off the register.
So at the moment, the way we're seeing it, that would not necessarily be the case.
So we need...
As I said, it's unintended consequence of an amendment.
Yeah.
If I could just talk to the evidence given by the National Catholic Education Commission, an organisation we highly respect. But in the Hansard on page 64, there were questions being asked of examples being given by Equality Australia. And because there is not the standard of evidence, how can they really know it's true? So this is where it becomes very difficult, and I'd like to remind the committee members that we've had a Royal Commission into institutional child sexual abuse because what the children were saying was not acknowledged by the police or by the churches. I'd remind the committee of Chanel Cantos, who last year, when the sexual abuse of women was becoming a big issue, did a survey or a petition that I think exceeded well over 3,000, predominantly in religious private schools, of students who had suffered sexual abuse, that the vast majority of those were not reported to the schools. And I'd also ask you to reflect on the New South Wales Upper House inquiry into the unsolved gay murders. There's over 30 of them, issues of lack of evidence, evidence being destroyed, and now the Premier is talking about that through those two inquiries that Upper House has had, leading into judicial inquiry or a Royal Commission. We're seeing a number of what I would call conservative churches wanting to retain in this law the right to override, say, the Victorian law around employment. What we're concerned about is that is the entry point to overturn the global movement to ban conversion practices. Now, in my case, I was never a victim of conversion practices, but let me tell you what happened to me in the Uniting Church. When I was living in Melbourne as a young 20-year-old, I was on what was then the Nepean Presbytery, and I was on one of the business committees. And we met in a manse. It was in by a young minister who was single. He used this very large manse for homeless youth. And word got out that he was gay and must have been a pedophile. That was not the case. So that was the message I was hearing from other religious leaders in my church. In my late 20s, when I tried to experiment being with a man, I failed. I came home because what I was hearing is it's dirty, it's sinful, you're going to go to hell. I got home, I stripped my clothes off, I got disinfectant, I got other harsh chemicals to wash my bodies and my genitals. And you can imagine what those chemicals do to your skin because of the message I heard. So these are the realities. That's my story. And so I'm very concerned when people say there's not the standard of evidence, because the standard of evidence has never been accepted in the past, and we've ended up having royal commissions. We've got royal commission into aged care, and the evidence is there. The LGBTIQ community has never been listened to. In this process, as one of the largest LGBTIQ plus communities of faith, we have never been engaged by the government. I had one call from the Attorney General's office with our first submission, and it was an abusive call. Our voice, our reality of what religion does and has done needs to be heard.
Yeah, look, thank you very much for sharing your story and what has happened to you. But also I think you make it's a point that we all need to take on board all the time, which is in a lot of situations, people are fearful about coming forward. They don't feel that they're going to be supported, whether it's with respect to their gender, their sexuality, or any other aspect about whether they've been abused. There is a fear. And the fact that we've seen it time and time again, as you've pointed out over the course of history, that just because we don't have documented evidence doesn't mean that it hasn't happened.
Thank you.
I think I would just add, if I may, and I'll try and be very quick, particularly in our tradition, the Christian tradition has moved significantly on many issues over time. It's not that long ago that interracial marriage wasn't allowed. Wasn't that long ago that slavery was allowed. All that you can find justification in our religious text. We've moved away from that. This is just the next frontier of where the community of faith is discovering that LGBTIQ people of faith are also one with God.
Mr. Masters, in your evidence just a little while ago, you made a statement about a phone call that you received. Could you repeat what you said there?
Oh, yeah, so we mailed our submission and some media release information to all members of Parliament and also to the Attorney General. And I was in the middle of a very busy consulting assignment, and I got a call from one of the staffers from the political office of the Attorney General. He said he wanted to talk to me about it. I said, look, we just don't have time. Could we make an appointment? He just kept bulldozing on and was basically saying I was wrong with this, I was wrong with that, was wrong with this. And it was just quite an abusive phone call. And I just had to, after about 15 minutes, I basically had to stop and had to go to talk to some people just to get a bit of support after that phone call.
So, Mr. Masters, that's a very disturbing report to receive in the context of what's supposed to be an open and transparent inquiry process. I'll leave it to you to perhaps provide in writing, if you so wish. I don't want to impose on you, but if you so wish, a more fulsome account of what happened. I'll leave that entirely with you. But I have to say, it sounds extraordinary to have a submitter to a parliamentary inquiry being spoken to in the way that you have described, which, in my view, amounts to harassment and intimidation. So I look forward to hearing from you, if you so wish, to provide us with the context and more information about that individual, the details of when it occurred, time, etc., would be very helpful for the community, because Australians have a right in a democracy to participate and put their view on the record. I mean, this whole inquiry goes to freedom of expression in a multitude of forms. So that is one of perhaps the most disturbing pieces of evidence that we've received. Well, I've never heard that before, frankly, in any inquiry. I'm very, very worried about that. Number of submitters about the time. You indicated, time pressures when you were trying to put the submission together. What's the impact of trying to put a submission together for an inquiry such as this? How much time does it take to do this job?
In our case, we are volunteers. We have no researchers. Uniting Network gets no funding from the Uniting Church at all, even for our conferences. We're a completely self-funded organisation, and we do everything by volunteers. And so you are looking at probably, a submission like even the third one. I probably would have spent, 40 hours plus on it, and I had a lot of pre-existing material. 40 hours when you're working and things like that is a significant effort. And then then got conference calls with related organisations and trying to get advice and things like that. So we are talking
Something
about
called Christmas as well.
Yes, and the timing over Christmas.
They're always at Christmas. These are always Christmas. In fact, I think it was Alistair from the Public Interest Advocacy Centre put out a tweet saying, third Christmas in a row gone over LGBTIQ issues.
Exactly. So, the timing is of concern to all of us, given the substantive nature of the impact of a bill of this kind on the fabric of the society. The timing is challenging. Could I just ask?
Sorry, could I just say also we had concerns that we did raise in our submission around the consultation process and the lack of adequacy of consultation in really, particularly for people with disability, from people from the LGBTIQ plus community and other vulnerable groups. So
yes,
it wasn't just timing for us in putting together the submissions over Christmas, but also the fact that that lack of consultation for this next draft.
Thank you.
And could I just ask a clarification question of Mr. Masters? In terms of the offensive phone call from the Attorney General's staff, was that under the Attorney General Porter or Cash?
Porter.
Porter, thank you.
Okay, thank you for appearing before the committee today and giving your time so generously.